Hi, I'm Jeff Natick, the head of engineering at ButcherBox. I'm here today to talk about our transition from a PHP monolith to the Jamstack. But first, I need to talk about how we got here. In 2015, we had a successful Kickstarter, raising over $250,000 to start ButcherBox. We started out with WordPress to build our initial website, and that allowed us to be quick to market. It was easy to hire developers who already knew PHP and jQuery, and it was great for non-technical people to use the interface that WordPress provides. We didn't need DevOps engineers or Kubernetes or anything else like that. We were able to just put it on a shared host. In fact, according to a number of statistics, WordPress seems to still power at least 37% of the internet now. But our business needs often fell outside the plugin ecosystem. We always needed something that was a little more custom than anything that was out there could provide. So we started to build custom PHP outside of WordPress. But business complexity grew and our page performance continued to drop. We had a mix of front and back end code in a single PHP file, which at the time was very usual, but proved to be a problem going forward. We also needed to rely on session state for saving data across a user's page visits if they were going through a multi-step form or something like that. It was also harder to share components across different pages. While there's a lot of things out there in the PHP ecosystem, none of them come close to using React. And this worked fine for a small team. We were scrappy and we only had a few developers on staff. But it wasn't so great as we grew and had over a dozen engineers working on our website. The platform became a bottleneck. We weren't able to deliver features as quickly anymore. The complexity grew and people became unsure of what change might affect something else on our website. So we thought about doing a lift and shift and building a new platform, but that seemed awful risky. The business kept growing every month and our needs kept changing. So anything that we'd start to do would likely have to chase after the existing website as new features were requested. So we had to swap the engine out mid-flight. The first thing we decided to do was to separate the front and back end code. Then we wanted to separate the core business functionality from ephemeral content. So having a separation from our product catalog and our inventory and our merchandising or promotional ads. We also wanted to greatly improve page performance. People know now that the faster your page loads, the more likely someone is to convert. And our pages were taking longer than 7 seconds sometimes to load. We also wanted to improve the team velocity by having a shared pattern library. We chose to adopt an open API specification for our new API to have a standard format for that. And we decided to transition our marketing content to Contentful to have a separate place for the ephemeral content to live. We were able to use Laravel Nova to replace the WordPress admin that we were previously using for more core business needs. And we selected Gatsby for our new component-based front end. We decided to use TypeScript to reduce bugs from type coercion issues that might arise using JavaScript, and Cypress to test our new front end to make sure that the critical business flows weren't broken when we released new features. We were able to add these tests to the CI pipeline and reject any kinds of merge requests that might introduce a regression. And so we decided to use something akin to the Strangler Fig pattern that Martin Fowler first coined. This is a pattern where you introduce a new application that slowly consumes the old application, taking out a route by route or feature by feature approach. And we were able to use the Jamstack to do this because using things like Netlify and Gatsby, we could create individual sites that would build a Netlify for a particular part of our website and use a reverse proxy to push traffic to that site if somebody wanted to visit that page without impacting the original site. So here's an example of what that might look like. We had a reverse proxy, which depending on the route that was requested would either go to the new Netlify hosted shop page or our legacy website. and the shop page would use our new API. And so recently we were able to move over our member pages and authenticated experience with Netlify and Auth0. And very soon we'll be moving over our landing pages to a similar situation using Contentful and Netlify and Gatsby. So the first section was the shop section. This was an easy place to start. And I definitely recommend, if you do this approach, that you find something that is low friction. Our shop pages are for one-time purchases. You don't have to be a subscriber, and that allowed us to greatly reduce the complexity. The content was actually hosted in Contentful, and I was able to pull that into Gatsby and then build on Netlify, only interacting with our API when it came time for the checkout. So here's an example of what one of those pages might look like. And originally we started out using a monorepo and using Gatsby themes. Gatsby themes is a way to share functionality across Gatsby sites. It's kind of like a plugin, but it's more like it could be a collection of plugins. And the way that I originally had set this up was to have lots of Gatsby themes shared and then to have individual builds. So you can see, or initially there was a one-time box theme, and that was for the shop pages. And then the plan would be to use another theme for the next section and still have a shared components and shared functionality with things like testing and React hooks and whatnot. And this worked pretty well because we could set up Netlify to actually build each different theme independently. So the idea being that we could have a change and it would take less time potentially because we'd be building less things since it was only a subset of our website. And that is one of the concerns with a Jamstack, is that you're no longer serving from a server, you're building things ahead of time. And so you lose the ability to just go into, say, WordPress, make a change, press save, and then see it instantly on your site. There could be a few minutes of time while the new site is building. So we were able to separate different parts of the site and have shared components and have separate builds that Netlify could build independently of each other. And we saw quickly that our page speed went from around 4 seconds to under a second, thanks to Netlify and Gatsby. The user experience of our new member page is near instantaneous, where previously, if you tried to transition from page to page, you would have to wait for the server to respond. We are now able to create a single page application in Gatsby hosted on Netlify that just feels instant. And that is great for our users. If we do still have a slow API response, we can show a loading state on the page. But as a lot of studies have shown, if you can show a partially rendered page first and then have blocks of that page come in as they're ready, the user still perceives that to be a lot faster than just blocking the entire render of the page until the server's ready. We were able to reduce the complexity by separating front and back end code. Previously, we had PHP wrapped around jQuery and HTML, and it could be hard to read sometimes, trying to follow along with the branching logic. Now we had a completely separate React application, and we had a PHP API. This separation also helped us increase test coverage. We were able to add things like Cypress, as I mentioned earlier, and then add better testing to the PHP side, as having a single endpoint is a lot easier to test than an entire PHP page. Another example of how Netlify and Gatsby helped us was our farms.butcherbox.com project. My boss, the CEO, one day said, "Could we ship a directory of farms in a few days?" He had recently been talking with somebody in the media, and we wanted to create a list of local farms that offered food like ours that we had nothing to do with, but to give a resource for people during the pandemic. And, I said, sure, of course, but my team is actually really busy right now. I'll have to take that on. So using Netlify, Gatsby, and Contentful, I was able to get our initial site running in about an hour. The Netlify experience paired with Gatsby and Contentful is amazing. There's very little to do besides click a few buttons and get your GitHub repository configured. So 2 or 3 evenings later, I had a farm directory built in React, hosted on Netlify, and powered originally by an Excel file that other people in our business had compiled. I was able to write a Node script to take that CSV and put it into Contentful as content types, and then pull that into Gatsby and create these filters from the content types. And this was really quick, and that was fine because we just wanted to get this information out and available to people, as at the time it was really hard to find meat in grocery stores. So a content change in Contentful would trigger a new build in Netlify, and I was able to hand this off to non-technical people and go back to my day-to-day job. The stack required no special servers, no DevOps team. It made me hyper productive. And without it, I don't think that we would have got this done in time. So you might be asking yourself, is the Jamstack for us? And I think there's a few things to consider. One is, do you really need to render pages server-side? You might have a reason that that is important to you. If, for instance, you have to dynamically render a page completely based on the user that visits it, maybe it's not worth the hassle. But for us, most of our pages could be pre-rendered, and the parts that needed to still be dynamic could be rendered on the fly using the API. Another question is it okay if content takes a few minutes to propagate during a build cycle? People are often used to querying a web page and getting instant results from the database. But in the Jamstack, that may not happen unless the page reaches out to an API. So if there's something that needs to be fairly instant, if it changes, you're going to have to still keep that dynamic. That doesn't mean that you can't use the Jamstack, but it means that you probably don't want to pre-render it. Another good question is, do you already have an API or a different source of content? The Gatsby framework uses a thing called sources, and so it allows you to quickly pull in WordPress posts or CSVs or APIs or a number of other things and generate pages from them. If you don't have any of that, it may mean that you want to rethink how you solve this problem. We didn't have an API, but it was the right decision for us to make one. So a few minuses. Builds can take a while. Not in these projects, but previous to this, I built a static web application using Gatsby for a different client, and it took over 20 minutes to build because it was parsing a CSV of almost 2 million cells. And that wasn't Gatsby's fault, that wasn't Netlify's fault, that was just computation taking a long time. So it's just something to keep in mind. And the approach that I laid out earlier, using things like multiple builds and multiple sites that to the users seem like one continuous site, but you're actually building different things, could be a good approach to get around this if you're finding that you're generating a lot of pages. For instance, we might have 1,000 landing pages, and I don't really want to build all of those every time that we make every single page. So it's likely that when we get to that, we'll have that as a separate build in Netlify. So only when we change a landing page do all those pages get regenerated. Another thing is sometimes building a separate API in front end can be twice as much work, or at least feel that way. I feel strongly that building a solid API is always a great investment, but depending on your business needs and your budget, it's something to consider. Another thing is that you become potentially more dependent on third-party services. So the convenience that you get from using various things in the Jamstack does come at a bit of a cost that you're dependent on those services being running at the time, and introduces a little more risk to one of them going down and breaking your site. But it's not that different from running it in a traditional server-side way. And honestly, I think this is actually more of a plus than a minus, because I would prefer to defer a lot of things to third parties who focus on them and focus on what we do best instead. Another thing is that complexity can shift to the front end in a statically generated site. This isn't necessarily a problem, but depending on how your team is composed, you might need to think about hiring other people. Traditionally, the back end had most of the complexity and the front end was mostly for presentation. And that has obviously changed a lot as JavaScript has taken over the front end in frameworks like React. So pluses, we get better security from static hosting. We're not exposing a whole PHP server the same way to the internet with the traditional security vulnerabilities that come along with that. We just have our API behind a web application firewall now, and there's not really any security concerns with statically hosted assets. We get way better performance. It was really fairly easy for me to originally get all 100s in Google Lighthouse using Gatsby and Netlify. Those times decreased as we introduced a lot of analytics scripts that would block the page, but from a core performance standpoint, it was much, much better. Overall, it did reduce complexity. We now have a very well organized front end application and we have a well organized API, and those two concerns are completely separated. There's also a lot lower friction for hosting. Netlify has been a great host for us, and I can't think of doing that on a traditional shared host server at this point. So that's it. My email is here, and if you have any questions, feel free to reach out. So thanks again.